In the summer of 2024, 12 of the greatest minds in the history of video game development, design, and theory gathered in the woods of Southern Oregon to discuss the modern gaming industry and the emergence of artificial intelligence technology. This is a series of conversations between old friends, old men now, men who have shaped the gaming world as we know it today, and whose innovations will continue to influence how we play for generations to come. Episode 11, The Gaming Industry Throughout the Years.
Well, that was the beginning of standardized education where you go to school, go to university, have all these experts tell you how to do it the right way so you don't fail, which was trying to go around the old model of education where you go to a master and he has you build 1,000 shares or whatever he's doing, and you experience failure nonstop under the guise of a master. So you're actually practicing your craft, practicing it, and eventually now you're an expert at it. Rather than trying to protect you from failure, they immerse you in failure.
Mm-hmm. Literature guys that ever miss a quote, I think it's Hemingway, which in Want to Be a Great Writer, Go Live. So that kind of thing. I think that's what you guys are all saying, is go have a life, because that's where the creativity comes from, is those, well, you've been.
Well, yeah, it's been fun watching the conversation pivot from "Are we dinosaurs?" to helping.
Yeah.
But
How do we help those mammals?
One of the things that and another point that someone made is that just by playing games doesn't make you qualified. And what's worse is I see a lot of them, they play the same game over and over and over and over and over, and that definitely doesn't get you ahead. And so the advice I give to people that want to get, and how do I get in the business is like pick a category or genre and just really get to know it cold. Like, because, they probably have more time to play game. Well, I know they probably have often more time than I do. So like if I'm doing an interview, let's say for role-playing games, and somebody comes in and can give me chapter and verse of like the last 10 big role-playing games and why this one did well and this one didn't, and what bothered them and what innovation happened there. I said, if you can give that kind of interview, it actually starts to become I don't want that person working for my competitor. And when my line goes there, you've got a job. And so I always encourage them to get that kind of body of information in their mind such that I'm afraid they'll go work for my competitor down the street.
So one of the things that is true is that 25-year-old gamer designer today has never known a world there were not video games. Yeah.
Nah.
And that is not true for people in this room. Yeah. That is actually a head start for them. And it is, they didn't need to have a vision for the concept that was what a game could be. They've actually experienced it, and to them it's like a completely normal part of their world. What are you talking about, Ruby? There's some difference between movies and games.
Yeah, we all grew up with television.
That's right.
And our parents didn't.
That's our version of that.
Yeah.
And so what I think is true is that they do have some head starts that we didn't have, which is they have a kind of a repertoire. They played a lot of other people's music. So now the question is, can they translate that to being a composer? What happens obviously in classical music is 99% of the people who become performers are on business, and 1% become composers. This is very much the same kind of thing. We shouldn't have an expectation that even though they have that experience, it's still the yield rate going to be.
Yeah, I'd like to offer a mirror version, which is I think we are profoundly freer in creating original work because we know the perimeter of what games are is completely arbitrary. Nice thought, but slowly come into existence.
Yes.
So for us, we can step outside. I think we owe it to other people who want to be creative in games to tell them that there are an infinite number of right answers and that they're obligated, like you were saying, to kind of think we're full of shit about some things, or that we didn't know all the answers, or that their favorite games don't hold the solution to every creative thing they're going to do in life. And I really want people to feel confident that they can do better than us, do things different than us, and not worry that the canon constricts them.
I think Kathy is.
Yeah, Kathy.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Fully charged.
Awesome.
There you go.
Powered up. One thing to that, I don't think we should lose sight of the fact that there's a bunch of young people doing great games right now that are kicking our ass.
Oh, yeah.
All right, and they're going to sell way more than anything we probably will create for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
Well, all the time, you know. So yeah, and I love it, you know. And they'll come out with something that I definitely wouldn't have thought of, and it'll sell, and they'll understand their market cold because they're in the chat rooms and they know what's going on. So, you know, it's not like there aren't a bunch of young people. I just wanted to remind that are doing some stuff that's amazing.
I think it's that's what's going.
What's that?
We're bitching that there's not more of them.
There's not more of them. Yeah. Well, it's hard to succeed at
Here too, 100 great games out there that none of us have ever seen.
Right.
You know, they're just getting their start.
Right. Right.
I think the point, I had a moment when I absolutely changed my thinking about what my mission was or my goal was. And I was on one of the, retreat type things for training and stuff you go on, and encountered some people who were saying, you've been looking, for some of us, you've been looking at it all wrong because you're foreseeing yourself as discovering a passion and then artfully constructing a path towards exploiting that passion so you get to do what you want and live the life you want to be. And they were putting forward, no, your destiny is in you undiscovered. It's all in its head. And your job is to discover the destiny by doing enough variety of things so the things you excel at and love emerge. It is not a planned structure where you construct your blueprint and then you build your house based on that. It's that you go out and by whatever means, I won't belabor the metaphor, you'll find yourself in a structure that fits you and you feel good in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I came home from that event just kind of thinking, damn, I think that's true.
Good.
And it altered my thinking about so many things that instead of the best made plans, it was experiential, giving yourself a chance to do things, including for me. And I don't know, I was in my 40s or 50s at that point, including that I had to look at what I was doing with the next stages of my life. I still feel that way. What can I be doing to figure out, okay, my destiny to this point, kind of clear, but what is the other chapters aren't written yet. How do I approach that to enable the discovery instead of how do I build it to produce what I expect?
I want to. So again, I think of my own life as just I'm a pachinko ball hitting weird pegs as I fall down toward the bottom. But even when I was a kid, right, they were trying to program me of you need to do this so that you can do that, right? Here, you need to plan your life, and it's all going to be a plan. And what we need to be telling kids is that they're on a journey. It's not a plan, right? You can plan a little bit of the journey. You can kind of say, I'm going to go north, but you can't say, and I'm absolutely going to arrive in Alaska on this date, on this time, on this criteria, which is kind of what they're being told they can do, that they can literally make a predetermined outcome of their life. Versus, no, life's an experience, and you don't know who you're going to run into and mate with. You don't know who you're going to, you don't know any of this stuff when you start.
Yeah. I think one thing we have to kind of acknowledge here is that people have different versions of success. So some people, I want to be well known, I want to make a lot of money, or I enjoy what I'm doing. One of my favorite quotes is that if you can't learn to do something well, learn to enjoy doing it badly. And there'll be a lot of people just making mediocre games that have a little audience, but they will have a happy life doing so. So we don't necessarily need to impose, you need to become a legend in the industry, type of mentality.
The value ruler for me is my 15-year-old self. Well, every time I kind of make a decision, it's like, what would my 15-year-old self think? Well, and to be honest, my 15-year-old self is pretty damn good, I think. So he would say, I want to race cars. Well, I got to do that. I want to make guitars. Well, I got to do that. My 50-year-old self has done pretty damn well, meaning the stuff that it would have, by definition of success as a 15-year-old, would be pretty happy with the outcome.
Yeah.
I think that kids don't give themselves enough credit for having their own vision.
I wonder if we're somewhat at fault in that in making games, in making good games, we say, oh yeah, as long as you kind of figure out the rules and do your best,
you'll be on this path and you will find a way to succeed because we've set up the games to do that. The ones that don't do that, people don't like to play. And maybe people spending too much time playing games is partly because it's more satisfying. As I know I feel this way sometimes with games, that when I'm getting stressed with the real world, it's like, here's a place where I know I will have challenges, but they're always graded so that I can succeed if I, apply what I've learned. And, I see the value in games as kind of training people to go out there, but maybe we've made a world where you can play games all your life, and so why do you ever have to succeed in the real world? You can live in your parents' basement,
I have one.
Some other story that I think is a great illustration of our generation and the generation that followed. Johnny Ma was a long time, I think, COO or one of the other top execs at Activision. Was one of the co-founders of Acclaim. His son is one of the two co-creators of FTL.
Yeah.
And his son made more money from FTL than Johnny Ma made in his entire career.
There you go.
And
And some of this is on us, right? Because in catering to the audience, right? Take the RPG genre. What's the RPG genre? Pray to the God of repetition, and he listens. Right? I get more powerful. I get more stuff. Right? It's the way we wish the world worked.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's the way that we teach the kids that the world works. So yeah, if you just if you do the grind and you do the right things, you're going to level up. And you're going to level up again. And in fact, we're not teaching them to go out and take risks. We're not teaching them to go out and do, exciting different things, or even, explore the randomness that life actually is. Because it's not as satisfying, clearly, commercially. Commercially, people love the fact that they can grind their way through and have, I won, or I finished, or I'm a master. And yes, again, I always thought of it, pray to the God of repetition, and he listens, unlike the real world. Because if you pray to the God of repetition in the real world, he doesn't always listen. In fact, quite often he doesn't. I'm assuming the God is he. It could be a she that you part of my problem.
Cocker spaniel. That's my turquoise.
Or maybe a dumb.
So, let's, Sid hasn't checked in?
Not yet, not back yet. I can ping him.
I have to make a quick call, but don't interrupt for me. It'll take you.
Okay. Let's turn to his issue, which is how have games changed the world? And that's going to be a tricky one to answer because games came in along with microcomputers. And those have had a huge impact on the world. And so it's going to be a little difficult determining what fundamental changes in our way of life, are due just to PCs and what are due to games. So we'll really have to focus on that.
It's electronic games.
Yeah.
Well, I think PCs got adopted a lot more quickly because they had games on them.
Yes, definitely.
But ignoring whether games had any positive impact for PCs came more quickly because.
Yeah.
Certainly sound, graphics, storage, all those things on PCs were pushed out. It's interesting. What's the most valuable company in the world today?
It's not today, but it was 2 days ago.
Well, NVIDIA, yeah. Well, even the other ones are all, not that far unrelated from what we're doing. But in NVIDIA in particular, I just kind of wish I'd had that foresight when, it was a new company. But, we have, certainly we can take credit as an industry for a lot of the speed of advancement of computer capability.
Maybe more importantly,
Yeah.
so my opinion is you would not beat your boss today if it wasn't. It's just that simple. There's no rational reason for graphic user interface on a phone.
On the speed networks.
Yeah, it's just all of this stuff. We wrote that over Steve Jobs' dead fucking body.
I was thinking about that point because if you walked into a toy store in 1965
And each spring, when the new players in the new baseball board game came out, I was going into the toy store 3 times a week, waiting for the moment when the new version arrived. And board games would have their section, and other toys that were on the edge. Is it a toy or is it a game? There'd be a section like that. But the toy store was full of all other things besides that, and it had nothing that was productivity oriented or anything like that. Then you look at, the iPhone would be the exact example, where the idea was it would replace all these other devices and be utilitarian. And by the way, you could play some games on it. And then was it 70% were games? I've heard different numbers.
My favorite joke about that, by the way, is the best description I've ever heard of the iPhone is it replaced Radio Shack.
Yeah.
Literally everything they sold at Radio Shack.
I know when I was at Google, this was 10 years ago, I doubt it's changed much. The entire Play Store revenue was dominated by game revenue.
100%, I think.
And when the month that Pokemon Go came out, it was 60% of the revenue, not for games, but for the entire store, for all the apps, everything else. I mean, it was just amazing.
By the way, so on the Android store and the iOS store, there are these three applications that greatly distort the business, that are these jet ownership applications that cost $6,000 or $7,000. So they don't sell very many units, and they distort the shit out of it.
Yeah, the mean,
Yeah, I think, but the other day I was listening to something, I think the Deconstructor of Fun, and they were saying that games are headed to be under 50% of the stores within a couple of years now.
Oh, interesting.
That it's already up in the the other apps are already in the 40s, and the trend is upward towards that.
What is it, like fitness apps or what?
It's everything, all apps.
Okay. On a good ISP.
Dollars.
So we changed the world, for sure.
Yeah.
In what ways is it good, and in what ways is it bad?
I'd like to point one particular change that games have wrought, and that is, I think they have really driven home to the younger generation. Oh, okay, someone else is doing it now.
Table.
Driven home to the younger generation the concept of what we call the learning curve. That is the concept that, if you work at it, you can learn and get better. That concept was not obvious before games came along, because
That's what sports is. It's all sport.
yeah, but
4,000, 5,000.
Any craft.
yeah, but sports never.
Technique development is exactly, that's a skill development.
My recollection of school years and high school and even into college was that most of the people I knew did not have a strong sense that if they put effort into it, they will succeed. About the only thing they attached to that was the notion of passing the test. Well, if I cram the night before, maybe I'll pass the test.
Yeah, I thousands of hours of batting practice in high school, but I thought
Music also.
Well, I think everyone can be a winner is one of the things.
Yes.
So, yes, you can do I can do thousands of hour batting practice. I will never be a batting winner.
that's right.
But I can be a winner every night or every day or on the bus because a game lets me be a winner.
Yeah. The
Whether
cause and
that's good, bad, or indifferent, I don't know, but I think it's a change. And we made everyone gamers.
yeah.
And by we, I mean our whole industry around the
Yeah.
world. And what does it mean to be a gamer? Like, everybody knows what min-maxing is now. And I talked to a real estate agent who used that for me. And, so we've created a lens through which everyone is viewing the world. And maybe there's some commonality, again, for good or for bad, but at least there's some common lens, which is gaming.
Well, unlike linear media, games are really the scientific method, pure and simple. You go up, you have a hypothesis, you press some buttons, do an experiment, look at the results of your experiment, reformulate your theorem, go back and do more experiments. So kids naturally, even at a young age, inherently practice the scientific method, and games reinforce that process.
Yes.
So are sixth grade science fairs better or worse now?
Ooh, good question.
Worse because they took away all their Estes rock.
Well, when you get to like a science fair and stuff, you're dealing with aspects of psychology. When somebody walks by, are they going to get drawn in? Or you're marketing this to somebody, and so I think they are still very relevant. Yes.
What Paul, you said something. Everybody's a winner is meant to up. So it would be interesting. I have no way to quantify or measure, but it would be interesting to see if we have actually improved that confidence of people play games relative to the normal society that we have. That has direct confidence in human beings has a direct productivity outcome.
Well, I'm not going to dispute that one, but 20 years ago 20 plus years ago when I started working on games as a service, and I suddenly realized that we weren't talking about all the games I'd done before. You could play them for 10 hours or 20 hours or 40 hours, or if you really made a good game, you can make a 100-hour game, even if it was a sim kind of thing, right? So they were all finite though. At some point people go, I get it, I understand the rules behind this, it's not fun anymore. And then started doing games as a service, and I thought, wow, we're destroying the productivity of the American young people, one day at a time here, because I can give them infinite time.
It's the world.
Yeah, well, at that time, it was America mostly.
But also at that point, you had AI back then. They were called multiplayer games, right? And I think that's what made it the ability to build a service out of this.
Well, there were a bunch of elements, right? It wasn't just one, but the other people was a big part of the content.
Let's do a comparative analysis and look at at a sequence of 4 steps. Let's start in the 19th century with mass reading, when printing became cheap and millions of people could start to read. What we saw coming from that was not just, obviously, literacy, but a huge expansion in the educational penetration and in the vocabulary. That is, you read letters written by those people in those days, and their vocabulary was superior to that of most people today. Abraham Lincoln never went to school, and you read some of his stuff, and this guy he can write very, very well.
And he didn't have the speechwriters either.
Yeah. It's just clearly cheap books had a huge impact on society in terms of their use of language and the range of their reading interests. Then my parents' generation, for them, the dominant things were radio and movies. They had the Saturday morning movie things that you all went to. I actually went to some when I was a little kid. And that had a powerful influence on the way they thought about the world. It's hard for me to give specific examples, but they definitely, I don't know, it seemed to me that the great classic movies of that era were important in their minds.
So my opinion is that there are a lot of artists who believe that movies carried most of Western society through the Depression.
Very possibly, yes.
That the movies that are made in that era were all aspirational.
Well, if you see Sullivan's Travels in particular, that was one that Hal Barwood made me watch when I made the mistake of saying that entertainment, itself was okay, but it wasn't all that valuable. It says you need to watch this movie.
I think A Wonderful Life. My opinion is that A Wonderful Life probably saved some suicides.
Yeah. So if we move into the television generation, ours, it's clear that television really affected us. It really, Mickey Mouse Club, God, what was the name of the Mouseketeer, the girl? Captain Kangaroo.
Mr. Gaines.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bunny Rabbit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Moose.
I thought they were real stairs behind the counter.
And my impression is that our generation, our worldview was profoundly shaped by television, especially because we were watching it every Saturday morning and many weekday afternoons. But then this generation now brought up on games, different point of view. I think ours was actually a bit more passive because we spent so much time just watching TV. So theoretically, we'd expect the younger generation to be more activist, more willing to step in and do things. I'm not sure if that's true, though.
I don't know that those correlate. I think activism probably had more to do with what was going on in society and population shifts, stuff like that, as compared to
Okay.
TV. Media just seems like a kind of reinforcer of what's going on, or
Reflects rather than guides.
One thing I'll say that I will observe is that over the time frame, humans became less and less, or it used to be 100% about humans, almost 100% about humans. Now in games, most of it is not about humans, or things that look human. It's about icons or cartoon characters. And as far as I know, furries did not exist before, say, the 40s or 50s. I mean, I don't know the history exactly, but I think the people's passions and people's fascinations have shifted more to the fantasy than they used to.
Well,
At least
also,
the majority.
our viewpoint on the world is mostly coming through these little screens right now, right? Back in the 1800s, they might get Little Richard's Almanac or whatever once a year, and that was their window into the world, right? My parents, it was watching newsreels about World War II. For our generation, we saw Vietnam almost in real time.
Yeah.
Along with the moon landings and Beverly Hillbillies, whatever.
Oh, real.
Yeah, but no, limited number, only a handful, number of channels. I can watch Beverly Hillbillies or the casualty count out of Vietnam.
Or Gilligan's Island.
Or Gilligan's Island, yeah.
Those poor people.
But now, the kids have an amazing telescope on the world. They can point in any direction they want to,
I think that's a real distinction. Television brought the world to us. It was really the first medium that brought the world to your house.
Yeah, and that was your awareness of the world daily.
What I believe is true is the internet, and mostly the internet, video games to a lesser extent, have allowed us to reach back out of the house into the world. So that's really the fundamental shift.
Yeah, Lincoln would have been a great YouTuber,
Can you imagine? Well, imagine if Lincoln could have self-educated himself from the web as it exists today.
Yeah.
Would he have been better or worse? Probably better.
He'd be a great YouTuber.
He would be. He would have been a good YouTuber. I'm with you. I agree. His jokes alone would have been reason enough to watch.
I don't know, the intellectual level of YouTube is far lower than the books available.
Yeah, but I would know. You wanted to have
There's some deep stuff on YouTube.
Which leads to the point I wanted to make, which is that each of these eras also had their excesses. And I think about popularization of inexpensive novels in the second half of the 19th century. Also brought
journalism.
Yeah, yellow journalism, and it brought Dostoevsky and Dickens writing where they got paid by the word. And I so suffered because you read it now and you can see just the effect that the business model had on expanding the narrative. And I suffered through reading those in school. But and you go through each of these eras, we could go back and we could identify they also had their own excesses, which were symptoms of different things, but also look at the social change during that time. If you figure second half roughly of the 19th century as affordable books, that's also a time because of the Industrial Revolution of tremendous migration from rural to cities that extended well into the 20th century and produced profound change.
Yeah.
Now it's reached the point where I still own 20 acres in south central Illinois. That's 20% of my great grandfather's homestead. It's a farm homestead from 1860. And I went back there at one point, went to a family reunion. I said to one of the cousins, right now we lease it to a stranger for soybeans. It pays the taxes, stuff like that. If there's anybody in the family who wants to farm it, I'll let them do if they can cover the taxes, let's keep it in the family. And he looked at me, and he was probably born around 1910. And he looked at me and said, "Hun, that's real sweet of you, but there's nobody left here who wants to farm."
Yeah.
So those changes were also going on as context for all this.
Yeah, but the dime store novel, right, of the 1870s, a dime is worth 100 times that.
Yeah.
That wasn't cheap, actually. It wasn't cheap.
It's only cheap compared to what was before it.
Yeah.
Well,
The penny dreadfuls, they were before the league.
your libraries, by the way, those are free. Your rents. Right.
Yeah, Carnegie started the libraries. That wasn't
Free.
yeah, that was 1890s or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So business model, man, always. And those, what was it? All those novelists are crashly commercial. Even L. Ron Hubbard got paid by the words.
I got paid by the
So you can tell.
Anybody who worked in magazines got paid. Anybody.
I feel like we got a little bit lost from your
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Can you refocus us a little?
How do we change the world?
Yeah. What effects on society at the broad level can we attribute to games? We know they changed the way young people think about the efficacy of learning, the efficacy of working to learn.
I think we can identify those changes, but I don't think we can judge them effectively because we're not the ones who they affected most dramatically. So an example of this is the transition from physical friendships to virtual friendships,
Yeah.
which for me feels, I don't want that. I want physical friendships.
That's the internet, though, wouldn't you say?
A lot of it is precipitated by gaming.
Yeah.
Okay.
Amy got there first.
But so again, I don't know that it's worthwhile us evaluating whether physical friendships and the digital ones are better or worse, but that is a big change. People are identifying their relationship connections through our media.
And there's social media, but my youngest, half of his friends, he met in games, and he'll never meet them in real life, ever. But that's about half of his friends right now. And that's considered normal for his age range.
Let's look at some of the negative things, or some of the negative expectations that turned out to be wrong. The most obvious was games are going to turn kids into violent killers. That was just totally wrong. Nothing like that happened.
Didn't look out.
But there was a second.
I got to say, I think we've been lucky. So I was deeply concerned that everything I saw about the DC sniper looked like somebody who liked to play Doom a fuckload a lot to me. I mean, it looked like if he wasn't practicing on Doom, he should have been. And that there's a bit of a pivot. I'll come out of that. But I think we have just simply been lucky that some of the most negative consequences we could have created just haven't happened yet. They may still, but we have taught a generation to expect to point out and shoot something.
It's been 40 years since all of
Big
those.
contrarian on that. I think social media is radicalizing people.
Yes.
Like that's like Tenet. I mean, the person that attacked Pelosi's husband was a Gamergate person.
Right.
There's plenty of violent movies out there, too.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other,
You can't claim that interactivity is different than linear and then say it has no consequences.
But I'm guessing that playing a shitload of Doom does not at all prepare you to fire a real gun.
I don't think, my opinion is what it might do is dehumanize the target. That is my concern, is we have dehumanized it. The other thing that I think games have done that we underestimate is the power of simulations in lots of spaces. So, for instance, we just ran a boat into a bridge in Maryland. What pain in the ass. But to be honest, 100 years ago, every day somebody was running into something. Same thing with flying airplanes. The pilots die, new pilots died at the rate of like 25% in their first year of being a pilot. It was a really high rate. That number now is single digits. There are probably, for good or for bad, military simulation has allowed people to be more precise in their use of ordnance. That means they're killing more people, but they're probably killing less of the wrong people or unintended consequences. The collateral damage has gone down, I believe, because simulation has made it possible to be more precise. What I think is true is all of those have, in some way, conditioned human beings to have a less emotional reaction to a circumstance that would have been emotionally jarring to them before.
Yeah, the first Gulf War was like the video game war, right?
We were making this, you and I were making sense at exactly that time.
Yeah.
We could just see it.
And it was just these infrared images with little heads-up display stuff and bombs dropping. You know, the Vietnam War, you would actually be in the trenches with a photographer, seeing dead bodies lying around. A totally different experience.
Yeah, exactly.
In the Ukrainian war, we're seeing.
Yeah, the drone footage.
We're seeing a little bit of it, right? So I don't want to get into that too much, but it's kind of interesting that, 30,000 civilians killed in one place, and we seem to get lots of TikTok footage of that. 1 million people killed in this other place, and I don't see any equivalence in the coverage. That's proportional. So, but what have we done? So back when the business model was different, I thought that we were doing a good job of teaching deferred gratification.
Yeah.
I bought this thing. I need to get my money out of it. I'm going to spend time on it. I'm going to put the energy into it. I will spend 40 hours on this thing. And that was deferred and we were counter-programming against the major culture at that time. The moment that social and mobile came along, we went with the flow. And we got really good about going with the flow. So, and I don't mean, it's not like that broad a brush, but it was a theme. The theme changed pretty dramatically.
Well, when you're talking about the 30,000 versus 1 million, did gaming have anything to do with that?
No. I'm just saying it's interesting to me that, got brought up, and it was just like, the footage is out there.
Yeah.
But we're not seeing the same. I'm not feeling the million like I felt the 30,000.
Right.
Right. And I mean the million is both sides together, right?
Yeah.
And literally the young male population of an entire country is being World War I.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a and if you know history, okay, bad things come out of this for quite some time afterwards.
Generally, the medium is the message.
One of the other accusations I might as well pose here, one of the other accusations leveled against video games from the very beginning was the children's obsession with them. That is, that the little boy playing them for hours and hours and hours, and that turned out to be true. And in fact, we now have the standard image of the teenager in the mom's basement playing all night long. That's real. Now, has that had negative effects? What do we know about what happens when these kids grow older? I haven't seen any studies or any statistics on outgrowing these things.
Yeah.
What about the exercise issue, though? That was another component of this, that the kids weren't getting out and running around.
It was
Other aspects of that. I think parents have become remarkably more protective of their children.
yeah, super productive.
We were essentially feral.
Yep.
By comparison to our
I read this passage, and it was like, guy walks in a room, and this other person over in the corner immersed in this device, and he could tell that, he didn't even notice he walked into the room, kind of creeped him out. He was, whoever it was living in this world. It turned out it was written in the 1500s, and it was the first time I saw somebody reading a book. It was a monk sitting over there reading a book. He was so immersed in the book, it creeped him out. This guy was living in that world, but didn't even see him walk in the room. So this is not necessarily a new thing.
Anybody here ever read the Bradbury story, The Belt?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So The Belt to me is video game.
Yeah.
It's complete video game.
Yeah.
It was 1948, right on the nose of human understanding of video games. For those who haven't seen it, it's a book about a room called The Nursery that could be anything you wanted. It's VR before VR. And all the kids want to do
before holodeck.
Yeah, and all the kids want to do is watch lions eat stuff. Parents are mortified by this, so they decide they're going to do something about it, and the children deal with it as they normally would. They feed them to the lions.
There's another, so from my experience with making toys and video games hybrid, we were selling physical objects. And for me, physical artifacts have this import that matters. And over the course of 6 years, we saw a shift. One was away from console games at the young age to iPads, but also we were measuring whether or not our audience thought the toys had value. And then we were also measuring it against digital object purchase. What we were seeing is in a fairly short period of time, a significant drop in physical objects having an inherent value because they were physical. That it became way more about what does this purchase do for me? Do I feel good about making this purchase? Do I feel, special or empowered and the distinction faded. And so I think that one of the things that games have done is diminish the inherent value of physical objects to people in terms of possession.
Also, how fungible it is. I mean, it's much easier to trade a digital object with somebody 1,000 miles away,
So the loss of tangibility is one of our byproducts.
Well, we talk a lot about, or maybe 60s in Berkeley, we talked a lot about how physical possessions and kind of trying to amass a collection of expensive objects was a problem. And I think what we've learned is it isn't the physical possessions, it's purely psychological. How does this make me feel? And how does this make me feel is not a physical watch or a bike or a particular game. I mean, for different people, it's different. But I think value being purely psychological was, to me, discovered through game.
That's an interesting thing from some of the work that I do on the medical side. There's I get into arguments with people about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation because they've read the studies that show when you pay people to do something, they start losing interest, and if they just sort of do it through play, they actually do more of it, all that sort of stuff. All good, but there are these paradoxes. It's like, oh yeah, so money is purely extrinsic, but you look at millionaires and particularly billionaires, they're not doing it because they need the money. The money is a way of keeping score. It's one. Yeah, exactly. And that may be not. I think that's always been the way for the richest people to be competing with each other for status. But this a lot of those things that are intrinsic to some people are extrinsic to others. A lot of us or the people that play our games care a lot about literally a high score being having some number on a table. I'm doing Duolingo. I have had more trouble with languages than any other intellectual activity in my life, and Duolingo is the first thing that has gotten me to actually break through, because I don't want to lose my status in the rankings, and I'll be damned if I, as a gamer, get outgamed by somebody who just pushes ahead in the last hour of things. I'm watching like a hawk, and I know that that's stupid, but on the other hand, I know that the intrinsic motivation of learning French is really high. So here's a way to sort of trick myself into doing more. And I don't know the answer to this, so I'm kind of bouncing back and forth. There are a lot of these sort of fuzzy things, or even doing games that help people. It brings up the question, well, if we can do this game that can help somebody learn to be less depressed or to overcome ADHD, and games have that power, they're as powerful as pharmaceuticals, how does it come about that they're not making people more violent? Because I really believe that they're not when you look at all the statistics, but it seems like I understand why people thought they were doing it, because it seems very logical that you play those games, you would actually go out and do that sort of thing. So it's a mystery.
I would say I have seen, we do have a generation of drivers with their first driving experience was Mario Kart, and I can tell.
You mean they're good drivers?
No, that's not what I mean. It means they're reaching for the turtle button all the time.
Yeah.
God, you know what I mean?
But I think one of the big positives of what we've done, though, is we've taught, because the medium is so pervasive now, a lot of the stuff that we do teaches indirection. And indirection was not a common human skill, in my mind, for people, right? It was more of an intellectual skill. And I think that that's interesting.
A little more concrete example of direction.
Well,
Do you mean parsing complexity?
could be.
I mean,
But I mostly mean thinking about things that are not directly physical, a level of indirection, right? So, I'm doing something to an avatar, or I'm doing this thing, which is indirect to get to this other
person.
Yeah.
I need to get to be level 7 before I can get this weapon, which I can then use to get this.
Well, I notice a lot of games, you're dropped into this very complex environment, and you have to figure out how it works, what's going on really quickly, and same thing is true if somebody throws you in an IT department, learn how to use this database. So I think games have prepared people to quickly parse complexity and, without reading a manual, without going through steps, just by intuiting, the inputs and the outputs.
And employing abstractions to understand the situation.
Yeah.
Third one, I think.
Building a model of a complex system as rapidly as you can.
There is an element of the related to the aspects of learning and the scientific method and so forth, and that's the notion of subjunctivity, thinking about the world in terms of alternate scenarios, what if types of thinking, and there have been some very interesting studies on that. Particularly because there is a relationship in language with it. That is, the Chinese language has no subjunctive mood. There is no word for if. They work around it to communicate the same idea, but it's a clumsier construction. And a fellow in Taiwan many years ago did a study where he took his students into 3 groups: English only, bilingual English and Chinese, Chinese only, and then he gave them a test. Typical question was something like, if Al Gore had been elected president, would the U.S. have invaded Iraq? And it was very clear. The English only all gave a fairly clear answer: no, that would not have happened. The ones in the middle got an intermediate score. The Chinese, most of the Chinese speakers said, but he wasn't elected. That's a nonsensical question. And so this is a representation of the effect of language on subjunctive thinking.
But that involves a model of the world to do the what if, right? You have to have a model of, what was Al Gore like? What was the situation in Iraq? Now, once I have that model, I can run the simulation in my head to answer the what if, right?
But the Chinese speakers, because they seldom use subjunctive thinking, because they don't have the word if, tend not to think in terms of alternate scenarios. They can do it.
There's another aspect of Chinese culture thinking about languages. If a language grows successfully and a culture grows successfully, it's hard to criticize the success of China.
Yeah.
If it grows without a subjunctive mood in its in the way that the language is structured, is there an alternate way in which the culture did not need one, ergo it was either grown and discarded?
Well, I think it's here's what's so interesting. Chinese think about grit, as in gambling grits, in such a different way than what.
Yep.
I think these are related. I think if you don't have a subjective index tool to think about what could happen, then it stops being odds and starts to be deterministic.
Yeah.
So Chinese really think about what is something.
Yeah.
That's a part of it. And somebody grew up in Vegas, like, I like people like you. You paid for my education. But what I think is underlying that is that language is the lens, the indexing that lets them order the universe. And in that particular case, the way that they deal with risk is different than we do. And as a result, they don't need subjectivity. They didn't need the subjectivity because something else was in control of that. That wasn't something that could change.
Yeah, this particular experiment was important because it demonstrated this the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis did have some truth to it. It, for the most part, it's been rejected, but it demonstrated, well, there is something going on here in that language affects cognition. But I would think games have had a far more powerful effect on getting people to think subjunctively. That is, okay, I'm entering this new level. What if I go to the left instead of the right this time? So I would suspect that this generation is better at subjunctive thinking than our generation.
I unfortunately have an unclear understanding of what subjunctive thinking is, but I do think what Will said about the scientific method and how the application of rapid testing, hypothesis, being able to say,
Yeah.
and paring the tree of possibilities down.
Yeah,
I think that's
very
a tool
close.
that has become more broadly used.
Yeah, these ideas are very closely enmeshed. Subjunctive thinking is a part of the scientific method.
What's interesting to me is that these kids were not taught the scientific method. You see this down at 4 and 5 years old, they instinctively approach it that way.
Yeah.
And
As long as they don't get killed doing it.
well, that's why they play games.
Exactly.
I think that's why play evolutionarily became part of our,
Yeah.
No doubt.
I just think it's a slippery slope to think about whether culture is reflected in language or does language influence culture. Somewhere at an early stage, I think language is reflective of culture, but that could be over a period of thousands and then hundreds of years. And in a modern setting, we could be the point where now language and culture now can be going back the other way. For example, Spanish has two forms of past tenses. And so you get a refinement talking about the past in Spanish that you don't get in English. We have other ways of saying the exact same thing. It can take a couple more words. It can take different inflection. There's the simplified theme is one of permanence versus current condition characteristic. But, what does that say? Does that mean that the Spanish-speaking people look at the past differently, or is it an artifact of some other evolution, including its roots in Latin?
That's the subject of a great deal of scholarly dispute.
I just want to throw in, when talking about legacy, and it made me think of one of the things that I never expected that I've been very happy about is literally almost every time I go to Europe, I talk to people who played games that I made, in the LucasArts days, and invariably, I hear, "Oh, I learned English playing your game." This is particularly true in the countries outside of France and Germany, where a lot of the stuff was translated quickly. But even there, they sometimes got the English version before their local version was ready. And certainly in Finland and Sweden, a lot of places, we didn't even do those translations. And they had an English to Finnish, dictionary or whatever. And they would, they had to solve these problems. And they cursed the monkey wrench a puzzle that we had in Monkey Island 2, which even the people in the UK couldn't figure out because it's a spanner there, whatever. But it's interesting. I think that era is gone now because the stuff gets translated right away. We have automatic translation, but at least there was a period where we were doing that with language, and the hegemony of English, getting spread all over the world was partly due to games.
That was the number one comment when I'd go to, especially Eastern Europe, with Fallout, because I was always curious, why is it so big here? Because it's bigger there than.
Oh yeah, our games were in Germany. Monkey Island 2 sold 10-to-1 per capita than it did in the U.S.
Yeah, but they would talk about. I would sit on my grandfather's knee, and he would play the game, and he would translate, and I learned English from the game, and I would hear so many variations of that story, and it was always lovely to hear. Every time I used to that nostalgic period.
I have heard a version of that for Sesame Street, and I've heard a version of that in the last 5 years for SpongeBob.
Yeah.
The answer is pop culture has been in the language education business since it exists.
Well, those friends in Japan learn English from the Beatles.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think many people have learned Japanese, though, from the many excellent Japanese.
My daughter has.
No,
Really?
Yeah. Amazing.
She got immersed in anime.
Really?
Just
You have no idea.
that generation, yeah, a lot of them have picked up.
major cultural exporter.
Yeah, yeah.
They don't speak Japanese, but they actually understand it fairly well. I have two kids who had 8 years Japanese instruction. Both of them, all they care about is manga. They don't anymore.
I see.
Well, my daughter speaks good Japanese just while watching anime.
Yeah, right. But it's just they don't get any of the feedback. So
Yeah.
So, in the right after Nintendo came out, there was talk about, because many of its Japanese titles were being converted over, and there was a lot of talk about that. There were also PC games coming across, and there was a lot of talk about it. And by the 90s, the current wisdom was, no, that doesn't seem to be happening. Instead, all we had was all your base belong to us. But I don't know. It's good to see. I would suspect that it's the anime culture that has brought Japanese language.
I agree.
Yeah.
We're not arguing with that. We're just saying what's happened is there was a carrier in that. The interesting question is what's going to happen with Korean now for people who are K-pop fans.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's
My daughter, her consumption of anime and manga that drove her to start visiting Japan. So then she spent many months in Japan because of that. And that's when she really started speaking it.
That's great.
And by the way, to balance things, I still remember signing the letter of credit for Raid and Bungling Bay, going to Japan licensed to Nintendo.
Next time in episode 12, we'll delve into the intersection of games, education, and intergenerational learning.